Maybe
Great.
you should just say something first.
Hi, this is Dr. Robert Lockhart at the 2015 Woodstock Fruit Festival. Speaking a little bit today on
Corrective exercise, the common postures, the uncommon postures, and how we can offset many conditions that you build up into your body by your daily activities, and what you can do to correct that, and how you can actually help to raise your health index by not only enhancing the quality of the blood, but enhancing the quantity of the blood to the various organs. Okay? So if you want me to specifically speak about any one particular part of the program here that I've been talking about, part of my program here has been involved in with my background training being in chiropractic and natural hygiene and the structure of the body. But part of my program is also to do with upgrading the health index, getting people back onto a rational type of diet, depending on their conditions. I don't even like particularly calling myself a doctor, because what a doctor is associated with these days is medicine. And actually, the definition of the word doctor is actually should be a teacher. And in that respect, I feel as though I'm okay fulfilling that role as a doctor. But I'm not here to talk about diseases in particular. I'm here to talk about health and how to attain health. And the best way to attain health is to live in accordance with nature's laws. And if you're doing that, nature itself doesn't know actually any rewards. It just knows consequences. Consequences of your lifestyle will produce what you and how you live throughout the rest of your life, especially as you start to get older and especially as problems start to arise. I'm 71 now. I would have had a hell of a lot more problems if I didn't follow this lifestyle, being a raw vegan for approximately 30 years and vegetarian maybe 50 years, because I was starting to come down with arthritis myself. I had rickety knee joints. I was playing quite a lot of sport, but I was also bulked up big. I was looking like a bodybuilder, but I wasn't particularly doing a real lot of training. But what I was doing was eating a diet that was too high in fat and too high in protein. Once I'd cut those down, and once I started to live in a way which my cells of my body were designed to be supplied with nutrition, which is a plant-based type of diet rather than an animal-based type of diet, rather than a starch-based type of diet or a grain-based type of diet. They're not suited to our bodies in the long term. You'll get away with it for many years following those types of diets, but if you're following those types of diets and you've got a reasonably not very good constitution, you'll start to develop problems sooner rather than later. If you've got a good constitution, you'll develop those problems later, possibly rather than sooner, but you'll develop them very quickly once you start to develop them. Okay? So there's only consequences. And there's no rewards particularly. The reward is that you live in accordance with nature with a pain-free body and a clear mind and a joyful spirit. And it opens up your mind to a lot more clearer thought, and you do become a lot more tuned into other sentient beings on the planet. So you couldn't really, I didn't get into vegetarian or veganism for a love of animals particularly, but now I find that I would hate to think that I was responsible for continual slaughter of animals and the terrible type of short life that they do have to endure. Yeah, my first initial introduction to was through the body rather than the mind then, and being that way orientated, I was able to realize when I see people walking around, I notice the older people were becoming more stooped. I notice the number of back problems. I notice the people making most money seem to be chiropractors or looking after people with back problems. So I thought, wow, that's not a bad way of making a living, I suppose. At least you're not doling out drugs and polluting the bloodstream of people, innocent people that don't know any better, that think they can find a remedy in a drug for a problem they've built into their own lifestyle by their own habits. So that's why I got into chiropractic initially back in the early 70s. And therefore I was very lucky. It shows that if you're doing if you're pursuing something for the right reason, doors will open. And the door that opened for me was meeting a Dr. Robert Martin, who was a medical doctor as well as a chiropractor as well as an osteopath, who developed the inversion techniques. And he taught me everything he knew. And I ran his corrective exercise class for 4 years back in Pasadena, California. And we had people coming in there which they would come to his practice initially, but he would pass them on to me because I ran the corrective exercise facility that was associated with his office. And we had people that had had multiple back surgeries. He was a back surgeon himself, and he gave it away because he saw that wasn't the answer to correcting back problems. The answer to correcting back problems is to get rid of the cause. The cause lies in the person's lifestyle. It lies in the fact that they build up a postural debt in their lives during the many, many years that they just continually sit and stand. We do everything sitting and standing, compressing our spines, and only putting our joints through the lack of the range of motion that they should be fully put through. To have a healthy joint, you've got to have full range of motion in that joint, in the body. So therefore, to promote that full range of motion, you've got to do a series of exercises that offset the many, many hours a day that you're in the one position behind the wheel of a car, sitting at a computer, sitting in front of TV. We're doing this for 16 or 18 hours a day, and then we go and lie flat and expect us to reverse all that compression that you've built into your structure by those hours of sitting and standing. So therefore that's a very big facet of it. The second thing that I was taught actually in chiropractic school was that all healing actually takes place in proportion to blood supply. The more blood supply you can get to an area, the faster it's going to heal. So if you can do that, not by putting on ice. Ice is not a good thing if you want to promote the healing process. So in my practice, I never use ice. I always use heat in order to enhance the healing process. You think of it, if you want to constrict a blood vessel and cause it to shrink, you apply cold quickly and it'll shrink. And if you want to open up and expand a blood vessel, you get heat into it and it'll expand and you'll get fresh oxygen, fresh blood supply coming in there in order to promote the healing process. All healing takes place in proportion to blood supply, okay? So don't listen to anyone that's all chiropractor or whoever is saying, oh, you better go out and ice that joint and ice this and keep on icing it. It'll kill the pain initially, but it's not going to allow the healing process to continue. When your body initiates a healing process, does it promote freezing? No, it doesn't. It promotes a rise in temperature. You go from 37 degrees Celsius up to 38 or 37.8 or 40 even degrees if you're young and vital. So heat is what the body generates, and so that's a thing which you've just got to ask yourself if you're doing the right thing, you know. Any other questions, Dave?
Well, Robert, a couple of things. Number one, if somebody already has impacted joints, they have stiffening and they have painful joints and they don't have full range of motion, can that be corrected? And if so, how is it corrected?
Generally, it can be corrected. Even in my own case, I had joints that were starting to break down, and I was only in 24 at that stage. I was doing a lot of running and playing rugby, and the joints were being subjected to a lot of trauma, and they were starting to break down. But say a person that may not have been doing any of these really bad good contact sports, you can still get attrition taking place, and you will get attrition taking place if the blood supply to those joints is not of the right quality. So really the first thing you do have to do is, in conjunction with the corrective type of exercise, you do have to correct the diet as well, and get away from the acid forming type of diet, which is found as you increase the amount of protein in the diet. Proteins are amino acids, so that is going to increase the amount of acids in the diet. We do not require a high protein type of diet in order to function efficiently. So a diet that has its calories derived from only 10% protein would be less than 10% even would be ideal. But our diets generally are too acid because they're too high in protein, and that comes from our meat-based type of grain-based type of diet, which promote that high level. And that will cause erosion eventually into joints, especially of knees and hips. And the consequences of that are everywhere evident. And the surgeons won't like me saying this, but basically if people were able to alter their diets, it would cut down on the amount of surgery probably by 80% or 90%. I also have a facility in the Philippines where the level of fat and protein in the diet isn't as high as it is in the Western society, and they generally hardly use chairs. They squat around on the floor, etc. So they're putting their hips and knees through a full range of motion, and therefore they're not developing that attrition on the joints that we develop in our Western society. And I see people in their 20s and 30s, but much more common in their 40s, starting to break down with their the heads of the femur, where it fits into the pelvis, into the acetabulum. It starts to erode. And the reason that the body, in its wisdom, is actually pushing those acids and toxins, cresols, indoles, and carbonic acid and uric acid, which are byproducts of high protein metabolism, they're pushing those toxins into the joints in order not to harm the more vital organs. It's trying to keep the body alive as long as possible. Your body will want to survive no matter what the conditions imposed upon it. Your body wants to try and survive. And in order to do that, it's going to try and last as long as possible, so it'll push the toxins not into the brain, not into the heart as such as much, but it'll push them into the joints of the lower back, the joints of the knees, the joints of the head of the femur, the ankles, the wrists. So that's the rationale behind it, but there's too much money to be made out of drugs which are giving people a temporary relief, but not actually curing the cause. And if you're interested in your own health, just think about it. Think about whether you want just temporary relief with the underlying cause still in existence, creating a problem where you're more likely to actually be in a wheelchair and a burden on someone else later in life. Do you want that to happen? No, I'd rather be dead than being a burden on my daughter or my family, you know. You want to take responsibility for your own health, and that is the best thing that you can do. And you've got to think ahead a little bit, because otherwise you're going to end up on the scrap heap, like most people seem to end up doing. They're taking drugs, and the quality of their life later in life is not very good, quite frankly. I can come to a Woodstock Fruit Festival with 400 or 500 other people, most of them young, all having fun, and I can join in the fun, even though I'm twice their age or 3 times most of their age. and you can still relate to people like this. So, you know, ask yourself whether you want that type of life, or do you want that type of life where you're a burden on someone else. So those are the type of questions you've got to ask, because the reality is actually that, and it's not a pretty reality.
Do you have an opinion as to whether dairy is worse than meat, or is it the same, or is there, I mean, in terms
I would think it would be worse, quite frankly. You can get away with a little bit of meat eating. Occasionally, it's not as detrimental as long-term grain eating, as long-term dairy enhancement and taking dairy into your body. I first of all went vegetarian, gave up meat. Sure, and I noticed a huge improvement, but I didn't notice the biggest improvement until I'd given up dairy, quite frankly. And there's certain opiates in cheese which are very, very addictive, and it's actually probably harder to give up cheese and dairy than it is to give up meat.
Okay.
And it's okay if you want to eat a little bit of raw meat or a little bit of raw oysters or something occasionally, you know. It's not going to kill you, but doing it every day all the time, it's not optimal. And if you want optimal, you've got to think about that. You think about, well, sure, I can maybe enjoy life a little bit more if I occasionally have a little bit of meat. Well, it's still perpetuating. If you had to go out and kill that beast and kill that pig, or you wouldn't do it, you wouldn't eat it, you know. We're not naturally carnivores, so yeah. I was brought up on a dairy farm, and a killing going on all around me, and the pig farm, we had 100 pigs and they were sent for slaughter, and the sheep, you know, it's just using other sentient beings as, and yet we're killing ourselves by doing it, but we're so addicted to it, we can't give it up, because it's the so-called norm. But once more and more people become aware of what that is doing to us, well, surely it'll make us think a little bit more. So watch a movie called Cowspiracy, watch Earthlings, and see just where your little plot lies on this planet, and see how you can actually help things evolve to a better level, rather than committing a holocaust every day on animals that are having to be used for no reason, because you'll be a lot healthier if you follow a plant-based type of diet. Yeah.
Okay, now maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but maybe you could just give a really brief sort of synopsis of your view of normal posture, standing, sitting, yes, versus the what you call the uncommon postures, and how that whole thing works, and how it helps the body and that sort of thing.
Yes. Okay. We are designed as a mammalian species. Most other animals are placed in the most neutral posture to gravity on all fours. We have evolved a brain which is large, and due to the fact that we spent many millions of years evolving, subjected to the biochemical richness of tropical fruit in the jungles that were originally our home, in the rainforest, with non-seasonal fruit that was available all the time, subjected our brain to the biochemical richness which caused it to become large. That was why we evolved to the extent that we did, and if you want to actually follow that particular line of thought up, look up Tony Wright's book, Left in the Dark, or he's written a new one which is an expanding on that Left in the Dark one, but his name is Tony Wright, and he's an English neurologist author. So it describes why our brains have developed in this manner, that we've been certainly separated from most other animals which haven't risen above the four-legged posture in order to be in the most neutral posture to gravity. Now, being upright, we should have the intelligence to realize that what we create in the upright posture, with our stance, with our posture, we should offset a few minutes a day by utilizing some uncommon postures to offset the detrimental effects of being in the upright posture all the time. We did this unconsciously over many millions of years by having to forage for our fruit, by climbing trees, hanging on by branches and brachiating and decompressing our spines, running to get away from wild animals, putting our bodies in all different positions just to survive. We don't have to do that anymore. We sit behind an office desk for 8 or 10 hours a day, and then we sit behind the wheel of a car, and then we sit in front of TV, always compressed sitting. No wonder we end up with back problems. Sitting puts 40% more pressure on your spine than even standing does. So that is going to result in thinning of the intervertebral disc, it's going to result in lack of joint play, and it's going to result in severe back problems in at least 80% of people, or probably more. And that is why we have so many people that are purporting to be able to fix up back problems, but none of them are actually getting to the cause. The cause lies in the person's lifestyle, and the cause lies in the fact that their muscular structure has started to weaken because they've been unbalanced in those sitting and standing positions for many, many hours a day. So what you create in one posture, you're building up a postural debt. So I don't know if I can move around here and show some of the uncommon postures.
Sure, yes, that's fine. Let me just back up
bring
a little
it back
bit.
a little bit.
And I'm going to refocus a little bit here. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
I'll see if I can
So
follow.
if we are all right.
Yeah.
Being in the standing posture, when you're young and youthful, you're broad at the shoulders, narrow at the waist. As we get to 45, we're starting to balloon out at the waist, and we're getting more or less congested down in the lower limbs. And as you get towards your old age, you're shaped like a pear. You're actually narrow at the shoulders and wide at the hips. And so you're pear-shaped. So why does that happen? It happens because the effect of gravity on the body, and it happens because the person's built up a postural debt in their body. They gradually go from being an upright person with a nice posture to devolving, and they're getting a butt that sticks out, they're getting a low back that curves in, and they walk like a duck, and they waddle. So you just have to go to any supermarket or any mall and you'll see multiple examples of how the human form is being subjected over a period of years to all the abuses that can be put on it, both through diet and both through lack of proper corrective exercise. So what you create in one posture, you should offset in another posture. So if you're putting your joints through the full range of motion, you have to do the full range flexion, you have to do the full range extension. And so you should actually primarily look at doing some extension exercises in order to promote the mobility and offset the many hours a day that we spend in the flex posture. We're only partially putting our joints through the range of motion when we're sitting. This sitting posture causes a shortening of the quadriceps muscle in the leg, which gradually over a period of time will rotate the pelvis forward on its axis, and that will put a strain on the lower back. And so you've got that constant strain on your lower back because this muscle is shortened, it's pulling the front of the pelvis down. So therefore you've got to correct the body mechanics by lengthening the muscles in the front of the leg and allowing the pelvis to return to its normal position and take the strain off the lower back. Once you do that, that is relieving a tremendous amount of stress in the body. And therefore, if you're able to actually do exercises that promote the lengthening of the anterior muscles of the quadriceps and allow the pelvis to return to its normal position, you'll be a long way going to fixing up your back problems. I've got a series of exercises which I'm going to share with Dave, not on this particular video, but I'm just mentioning on this particular video that there are the corrective postures which I recommend a few minutes a day, that only involves probably 15 minutes a day, doing a series of 6 exercises, performing those individual exercises 1 or 2 or 3 times each one, and you can offset many hours a day and years of abuse, and enable you to learn how to do a handstand, which is probably the best single exercise that has ever been created for us. Being on our hands, we're able to get upside down and reverse the stresses on the joints that are actually being stressed all the time. When you think about a joint in the spine, there's 132 joints, I think, in the spine. And each one of those joints, if you're sitting and standing, is being subjected to pressure all the time in a particular part of that joint. When you do a handstand, you're taking the pressure off that part of that joint and putting it and loading it on another part of the joint. So that is beneficial. It's like, that joint finally gets a little bit of relief. And so, yeah, these are really important things to think about. Why was the inversion boots invented, where you can hang right upside down and decompress the spine and thicken out the intervertebral disc? You can even exercise upside down with the weight off the joints. So in a video, an upcoming video, I'll be showing you some of the exercises you can do that specifically can reverse and thicken out the disc space, which will otherwise cause you to lose about ½ an inch in height every 20 years. So by the time you're 60, you could be 1.5 inches shorter than you should be, unless you do something to offset that. And think about your internal organs too. If you're continually only allowing gravity to stress them in one way, those organs are going to gradually get settling. You get a settling effect. And when you get that settling effect, the blood supply can't get in there. And what happens then is that cellular changes gradually start to take place because of lack of blood supply. Lack of oxygen into a cell will trigger cancerous changes in that cell. So this is the whole thing. You'll notice that cancer develops in those areas of the body that has lack of blood supply, lack of oxygen getting into it. The bottom part of the lungs, where the lungs settle, that's the most frequent area where you find lung cancer developing. Colon cancer, in the lower part of the colon, where the blood supply is not adequate to flush out the toxins that are building up through the wrong diet. But it's generally the wrong diet which is the main thing which is going to be causing cancerous changes, through being too high in fat, too high in protein. The fat type of diet puts a fatty film over the lining of the cellular wall, so oxygen cannot penetrate through that cellular wall because of the lining of fat on that wall, and therefore the cell has to de-differentiate and become a simpler cell, changing from an anaerobic form of respiration to an anaerobic form of respiration, just to survive. And so when those changes start taking place, you've got a precancerous condition. So that's, in a nutshell, all these things do have a big factor to play, and you can see how everything is interconnected. Health should be looked at from an all-sided approach, and that's why I don't feel as though I would like to say that I'm just a structural therapist without bringing into the other physiological changes which take place through not having the right type of diet and the right type of bloodstream. So I think I'd like to just wind it up here now, just for an introductory video from what we've been talking about today, and we can get to more specifics in some other videos which we might do at a later date.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lockhart. Appreciate it.
Having me on, Dave. That was fun.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Great interview. Thank you.